Hey guys, tonight we drift back into the gaslit haze of 19th century England, where sleeplessness wasn't just a nuisance, but a full-blown moral crisis. You find yourself pacing cobbled streets, boots echoing softly under flickering street lamps. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorts behind its carriage blinders, and a paperboy dozes upright against a post. You're not the only one awake, but you might be the only one still hoping for a cure. Back then, insomnia wasn't called insomnia. It was referred to with phrases like nervous agitation, mental overexertion, or even unsettled spirits. The Victorians didn't fully understand sleep, but they were deeply convinced that losing it meant losing control of body, mind, and moral compass. You weren't just tired, you were fragile, and possibly cursed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your walk through a city that never quite sleeps. Not because it's bustling, but because it's worried. A place where people measure rest in tinctures bed angles, and what their doctor's latest pamphlet says about the dangers of moonlight exposure. Through foggy windows, you glimpse silhouettes moving behind heavy velvet curtains. Someone is heating milk over a fireplace. Another peers anxiously into a looking glass, inspecting the color under their eyes. Sleep isn't taken for granted. It's hunted like a fox in the hedgerows. London's nighttime air is damp, and slightly acrid coal soot clings to your coat collar. If you were upper class, you might be locked inside a sleeping chamber with padded doors, fresh-cut lavender, and complete silence enforced by servants. If you're poor, you share a bed with two siblings under a drafty eave where the ceiling creaks and the neighbor's baby cries through thin walls. And if you're middle class, well, you're probably reading The Times, sipping camphor syrup, and hoping the article on naval news knocks you out cold. Sleep advice is everywhere. Physicians warn against tight corsets, spicy foods, and thinking too hard before bed. No reading of poetry, past dusk, one pamphlet says. It excites the nerves. A well-known London doctor insists patients avoid thinking in italics. You pause. You wonder what that even means. There are no sleep clinics yet, but there are plenty of remedies. You've seen them advertised guaranteed to induce repose without risk to digestion. Most contain opium. Some contain mercury. Others involve simply lying very, very still and hoping your soul finds its way home. As you turn onto a quieter street, a gaslighter trundles by on a tall ladder, snuffing out lamps one by one. Each extinguished light makes the road softer, quieter. The only sound is the faint clatter of his brass tools and the distant tick of a hall clock behind a shuttered window. You wonder what people feared when they couldn't sleep. Some believed demons crept in during the fourth hour. Others believed it meant divine punishment. Many were convinced that staying awake too long could disfigure the face. Don't let the sleeplessness settle into your bones, warns one old housemaid in a Yorkshire diary, or your teeth will turn hollow from the inside out. Historians still debate whether insomnia was more common back then, or simply more feared. Sleep was fragile, precious, and suspicious, and it wasn't something you could complain about openly unless you were very rich or very eccentric. For example, diarist Clara Trenthall, a minor aristocrat from Bath, documented nearly 200 separate evenings of sleep failure. Her solution: sitting in complete silence watching an hourglass empty and imagining herself as sand. It's oddly poetic and incredibly boring. And yet, there's something comforting about this shared obsession. Even now, over a century later, the human desire to just drift off remains the same. The solutions have changed, but the need has not. Back then, no one talked about sleep hygiene. Instead, they talked about humors and balance. Too much bile. Try nettle tea. Too little blood in your feet. Elevate them above your head and think about sheep. Ah, yes, sheep. Always the sheep. But we'll get to that. Tonight, though, you're still walking. The city exhales through its chimneys. A constable nods at you bleary-eyed and clutching a hot potato in wax paper. You nod back. Two strangers in a sleepless empire. Eventually, you return home. You live in a modest townhouse, with creaky floorboards and a too-soft mattress that sags in the middle like a soup bowl. Your slippers are cold. Your hands smell faintly of pipe ash and citrus oil. You sit on the edge of your bed, take out a small silver vial labeled Nervin's Nocturne. You uncork it. The smell hits you, licorice laudanum, maybe a dash of lavender. You don't drink it, just sniff. That's enough to make you drowsy, or anxious, or both. Some Victorians believed that sleep would return only if you pretended not to want it. "Lie with your eyes open," said one newspaper columnist. "Sleep will come to mock you. Then you must trick it into staying." And as you lie down, you hear the distant clop of hooves. A delivery cart, a thief, or just the dream beginning. The truth is, there's no perfect cure. Not then, not now. But as long as you keep walking through these stories, you might just forget you're awake. You're still awake. You fluffed the pillows twice, rotated the mattress once, and even flipped it top to tail, as advised by that aging house physician in The Morning Chronicle. Still, your eyelids flutter like moths against a lamplight. It's not just you. Victorians were united in their insomnia, and part of that may be thanks to what they were sleeping on. Let's talk about Victorian beds. First off, you can forget memory foam. A standard upper-middle-class bed in the 1860s consisted of a wooden or iron frame with something called sacking, stretched between its rails. Think of it like a supportive net of tightly woven rope or coarse webbing. On top of this base sat a horsehair-stuffed mattress, lumpy and heavy with no hint of spring. You didn't sleep on it so much as settle into it like a gently defeated sandwich. Some more elite mattresses were stuffed with flock bits of wool or cotton fiber, or even down feathers. But beware too many feathers and you were accused of vanity. Too few and your bed was said to be morally instructive. Yes, your mattress could signal virtue. Now, once you were in bed, there were rules. Lots of them. You couldn't just flop down sideways and drift off. No, the Victorian obsession with symmetry, propriety, and digestion meant there was a correct way to lie down. Too flat. Your humors might stagnate. Too upright. The blood rushes from your toes and ruins your dreams. One pamphlet insists lie upon thy right side first to favor thy gallbladder. Another warns against sleeping near mirrors, claiming they confuse the soul's passage. As always, historians argue over whether these rituals were sincere beliefs or elaborate nonsense. Perhaps both. Still, they gave structure, predictability, a bedtime routine that soothed the brain even if it didn't always soothe the body. And that's something, isn't it? Now you might ask, where did this deep unease about sleeping positions come from? Well, partially from the medical tradition stretching back to Hippocrates and Galen, which taught that the body was governed by fluids and energies that moved in specific directions. Sleep, in this logic, wasn't just a break, it was a recalibration. And lying wrong could literally warp your soul. You weren't just falling asleep. You were surrendering your entire spirit to the night. No pressure. Some people even hired sleep consultants, though not by that name. Wealthy households brought in medical men who specialized in posture therapy. These professionals would rearrange pillows, adjust headboards, and recommend strict breath control techniques. One even claimed to cure night frights with leather-bound bolsters. Your pillowcase wasn't just cotton. It might have been infused with lemon verbena thyme or valerian root. Essential oils, Victorian style. Still, despite all this, people didn't always sleep through the night. Not because they were disturbed, but because that simply wasn't the pattern. There's a thing called segmented sleep, a two-part system believed to be the norm before industrial lighting became common. You'd go to bed around 9 or 10 p.m., sleep for 4 hours, wake up naturally around 2 a.m., then spend an hour or two deliberately awake. You might read, pray, write letters, or just lie there thinking about, well, probably taxes and digestion. Then you'd fall back asleep until dawn. Even Queen Victoria reportedly kept a candle holder by her bed for these middle-of-the-night musings. Her second sleep, said one maid, was always lighter, but more peaceful. So if you're tossing and turning right now, maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're just historically accurate. Let's take a peek at lower-class sleep now. If you were a factory worker, you probably lived in one room with several family members. You might sleep on straw, a shared mattress, or even just a pile of folded clothing. Children often slept together for warmth, sometimes head to foot to minimize lice transmission. Your sleep was often dictated by work hours. Shift changes, factory whistles, and gaslight schedules overruled your body's needs. No dreams of gallbladders here, just exhaustion. Still, some working-class people swore by their own cures. hot bricks wrapped in cloth placed under the blankets, warm ale with nutmeg, reading aloud from the penny dreadfuls until sleep snuck up behind you. Even so, by the 1880s, insomnia was being rebranded not just as a health condition, but as a class concern. Poor sleep became a symptom of refinement, especially in middle and upper class women. One doctor wrote, "She who cannot rest well is often she who thinks too much and feels too deeply." His patient, a piano teacher from Norwich. Her remedy, sleeping on the floor for 2 weeks to reset her nerves. Of course, not all advice was medically sound. A popular home remedy from 1874 suggests sewing lavender blossoms into the hem of your nightdress and soaking your feet in salt water until the toes tingle like bees. Another swore by rubbing goose fat on the soles of the feet. Quirky, sure, but you're not sleeping yet, so who are we to judge? The Victorian age was a golden era of pamphlets, little folded guides filled with sleep wisdom. Dr. Penwell's Advice to the Weary sold over 50,000 copies, offering readers such gems as "Do not dwell upon the shape of the room," "Never wear crimson past 8 p.m., "Avoid music in the key of D minor as it agitates the liver," and then there's the Book of Nightly Composure, an anonymous diary turned guidebook that recommends whispering arithmetic to yourself. Begin at 1,000 and subtract 3 until sleep takes you, not subtract 2. That's too soothing. Subtracting 3 was apparently just right. Modern scholars continue to debate whether Victorians were more sensitive to sleep disturbances or simply more afraid of what insomnia revealed. That your moral compass was off, that your diet was impure, that your soul was uneasy, but maybe they just didn't have blackout curtains. Now, as you settle back again, right side first, perhaps you might picture the ideal Victorian sleeping chamber. Dark green walls, thick drapes to block moonlight, a small coal fire in the grate, an oil lamp turned low, and silence. Silence so deep it hums, and there you are in the middle of it. Still awake, yes, but surrounded by a long lineage of sleepless wanderers who tried everything, to tame the night. And somehow, knowing that, makes you just a little more ready to try again. You roll onto your back and stare at the ceiling, half expecting it to blink back at you. In the flickering glow of your oil lamp, shadows leap across the crown molding like lazy ghosts. Maybe you need a distraction, something to pull your brain away from the day's worries. But remember, you're Victorian now. That means no phone, no sleep app whispering ocean waves, no podcast promising one more story, and then sleep. What you do have is a prayer wheel, a hand-cranked magic lantern, and possibly a charm sewn into your pillowcase. Welcome to the world of Oz. Victorian distraction sleep methods. You rise careful not to wake the floorboards. At the side table sits a curious device, a rotating prayer cylinder wrapped in verses from Psalms, designed to spin slowly under candlelight. The idea, as it turns your mind, turns with it, unwinding into the rhythm of faith and fatigue. Whether you believe in it or not, the tick of its axle and the shimmer of script can lull you into the kind of stupor that pairs well with heavy blankets. Some people preferred shadow lanterns. You'd light a tiny flame behind a painted wheel, silhouettes of sailing ships, or flying angels slowly rotating, casting hypnotic patterns across the bedroom walls. Children adored them. Adults claimed they soothed inner storms. And then there were story spoons. These weren't literal spoons, though some were shaped that way. They were small tokens engraved with a bedtime tale part, prayer part, proverb part, riddle. You'd hold one, whisper its story aloud, and pass it beneath your pillow. A form of sleep sigil. Never let the tale end unfinished, one popular one warned. Or the night will stretch and the dreams run wild. Today, it sounds charming. Back then, it was serious business. Victorian minds were restless and anxious, often burdened by new technology, changing work schedules, and moral panic over everything from novels to train timetables. So distraction wasn't just welcome, it was required. Mainstream historical records tell us that the upper classes often used bedtime journals to drain their thoughts before sleeping. Not gratitude journals, more like exhaustive checklists of concerns. Father remains cold, one reads. The dog has eaten kerosene-soaked rags again. Must replace governess. And you too might keep a little book beside your bed. The leather binding is cracked. Inside, looping script sketches of chairs, clippings of pressed flowers. You trace your fingertip down a page titled Things to Ignore Before Bed. It includes the fear of never sleeping again, the sound of water pipes groaning, any dream involving rabbits in waistcoats. Some distractions, though, were more performative. In wealthier homes, people hired readers, servants, trained to recite dull material in soft voices just before bed. Preferred genres included tax codes, geography textbooks, and shipping manifests. I drifted off just as the port of Bristol was unloading cod, wrote one baroness approvingly. Historians still argue whether this was an indulgent quirk or an early form of hypnotic suggestion. Either way, it's the kind of luxury that feels utterly Victorian, conjuring a servant not to fetch you water, but to bore you professionally. And yet not everyone had access to live readings. So publishers stepped in. In 1882, a London bookseller released The Evening Compendium of Dull Facts, a nightly serial packed with tedious trivia. Things like the evolution of nutmeg taxation and a detailed account of flannel looms in Lancashire. It was wildly popular. Some readers claimed they couldn't get through more than 2 pages without dozing off. Others weren't so lucky. You probably know someone in your neighborhood, an older woman perhaps, who swears by more. Folkish distractions. She keeps a pouch of barley under her pillow. Swears on her mother's grave that if the grains are still warm by morning, your dreams were good ones. Or maybe you've heard of the matchstick method. Light a single wooden match, blow it out, and try to fall asleep before the wisp of smoke disappears entirely. It's harder than it sounds, and oddly addictive. There's even a superstition that insists you count all the brass buttons in your bedroom aloud each night. Miss one and you invite tiny hauntings, whatever those are. Modern researchers might call these compulsive behaviors or anxiety rituals, but Victorian minds were more flexible with labels. Was it magic, science, religion, habit? The line blurred in candlelight. Of course, not all distractions were passive. Some people found their best sleep after knitting for an hour. Others wrote letters they never intended to send, entire pages of polite complaints to relatives who'd long since passed away. You can picture it. Dearest Cousin Edgar, the bed bugs remain despite lie. The pantry reeks of mint and sorrow. Do write soon, soothing in a strange way. You curl back under the blankets thinking of all these strange rituals. The quiet, spinning wheels, the rustle of nightgowns, the soft glow of painted glass ships on your wall. Maybe tonight you'll count your brass buttons, or whisper old shipping manifests to yourself, or write a note to no one at all. Whatever works, because in the end the goal hasn't changed. Distract the mind, soften the edges of worry, and gently, ever so gently, let the day release its grip. And maybe, just maybe you'll stop thinking and start dreaming. You lie there mind adrift between lantern shadows and matchstick smoke, and you wonder, should you drink something? A warm beverage, perhaps. The Victorians were fond of bedtime drinks, but as you shuffle into your slippers and approach your little kettle, the question isn't what to drink, it's how much danger are you willing to sip tonight? Because in the 19th century, bedtime beverages danced a curious line between comfort and chemical gamble. Kazi, let's begin with a classic, Mikius, tea. Yes, you know it today as a calming ritual, but to the Victorians tea was medicinal, moral, and occasionally scandalous. Chamomile was widely accepted. So was valerian root. But stronger brews like Lady's Black Blend or Bishop's Milk often included soothing agents we'd no longer recommend today. Take laudanum, for example. This potent tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol was sold freely in corner shops. It was labeled soothing syrup sleep, cordial, or most dangerously, mother's little friend. Recommended for sleepless children, grieving widows, and overwrought postmen alike. It worked, but perhaps too well. You hold the bottle. It's heavy in your palm with a skull-embossed cork for safety, which no one pays much attention to. On the label, there's a note. 1 spoonful at dusk. A second only in grievous distress. And what constitutes grievous is left entirely up to you. But let's say you're not in the mood for narcotic slumber. Perhaps you reach for yassi, warm milk gently infused with nutmeg, or a posset, a mixture of milk curdled with wine or ale served hot and thick. Recipes varied wildly. One popular version included cinnamon lemon peel and the crushed heart of a roasted date. A fringe recipe from Devonshire swears by adding mashed banana skins for the mellowing of inner tempests. Historians still argue whether these combinations helped due to their chemical properties, or the comforting act of preparing them. Was it the tryptophan, or the quiet, or just knowing you had something warm to sip in the dark? Other drinks leaned into aromatics. There's work sleep cordial, a syrup made from violets, poppy petals, fennel, and sugar. Thick as honey, it was meant to be spooned slowly onto the tongue, letting the florals unfold. Dreams bloom sweeter through violets, claimed a recipe in The Lady's Companion. 1867 edition. More daring households tried hoskie, mugwort brew. A bitter, pungent tea made from dried leaves believed to open the dreaming eye and ward off evil thoughts. Side effects may have included prophetic dreams and upset stomachs. And then there's the poor man's cure, burnt bread tea. Yes, you read that right. Take a stale slice of bread, blacken it in the fire until it's nearly ash, steep it in hot water, and drink the resulting grayish fluid. Supposedly it absorbs dark humors and draws out unwanted dreams. It tastes like charred regret and wet fireplace, but some Victorians swore by it. You take a sip now of something tamer. Milk with honey. It's warm if slightly scorched. A few drops of lemon linger at the bottom, and somehow that's enough to calm you just a little. Still, caution Victorians loved to experiment, but they also paid the price. In 1871, a well-known herbalist named Winthrop Dane concocted a sleep tonic from night-blooming datura and rhubarb extract. It put 4 clients into comas, one into a spontaneous poetic trance, and another into an extended nap of questionable duration according to his diary. No one sued him. Instead, he became even more popular. It was an age of paradox, obsessive caution, and wild abandon existing side by side. Many Victorian women were quietly addicted to sleep drops sold under respectable names like Dr. Fairley's Composure Essence. These vials, hidden in sewing baskets and prayer books, were often laced with morphine or chloroform. One sniff could quiet a frantic heart. A second could quiet everything else. And yet, in the same breath, a London nurse would recommend letting lavender steam fill the room, or placing sugar cubes soaked in rosewater under the tongue. Gentle cures, harmless ones. Lost arts of fragrance and slowness. You sit with your cup in hand and think, what do you believe in? Warmth ritual, or something a little stronger. As the room settles, you remember a detail from an old woman's memoir, how her mother would brew a final drink before bed, not to drink, but simply to inhale. A kind of olfactory meditation. Lemon peel rosemary cloves. She called it breathing the garden. Sometimes the garden was all you needed. You place your empty cup on the bedside table. The air is a little softer now, a little heavier. And though your thoughts still linger on datura tonics, shadowy apothecaries, and poetic comas, you feel that gentle tug at the edge of sleep, not from the drink, from the ritual. Because in the end, Victorian cures weren't always about what you took. They were about what you believed would carry you gently, quietly into the dark. The bed creaks slightly beneath you as you shift again, not quite awake, not quite asleep. The faint warmth of your drink still lingers in your chest, but your mind, stubborn as ever, refuses to settle. The ticking of the mantel clock grows louder in your ears, each tick a gentle reprimand. You lie there and think, what if the bed itself were the problem? Ah, yes, in the great pantheon of Victorian sleep obsessions, the bed wasn't just furniture, it was a machine, a battleground, a laboratory, a place where innovation and anxiety collided nightly. Let's begin with the basics. Most Victorian beds were heavy things imposing wooden frames or intricate cast-iron contraptions that could hold up under the weight of 3 generations of sleep, or worry. But some inventors saw beds not as solid havens, but as devices that could do things, like rock you back to sleep. Inspired by infant cradles and maritime hammocks, several sleep engineers, yes, that was a term used in at least one trade pamphlet, began developing motion beds for adults. These were not gentle swings and hammocks. No, these were ornate contraptions, wood or iron frames mounted on curved bases, or suspended from steel springs designed to sway the body in specific, supposedly therapeutic directions. You might recline in one and gently tug a cord to initiate motion. or have a servant pull it for you slowly and steadily, like winding a grandfather clock with human mass. One particularly famous model, patented in 1858 by Cornelius Rudge of Kent, could simulate a nautical sleep experience. A pendulum hidden beneath the frame mimicked the motion of a small boat. The instructions warned, "Not recommended for those with gastric delicacy or sea trauma." They sold surprisingly well. Historians remain divided on whether these beds helped people sleep or simply gave them something new to worry about. One physician called them exceedingly soothing until the pendulum snapped. But movement didn't stop with swaying. The Victorians also dabbled in vibrating beds, powered by crank handles or foot pedals. These were touted as nerve relaxers and mood balancers. The idea was that gentle oscillations would rattle stress out of your spine like dust from a rug. Of course, they rattled the entire house as well. In one infamous case, a tenant in Liverpool was evicted for incessant mechanical disturbance caused by nocturnal wobbling. He defended himself by quoting an advertisement, "To sleep in stillness is to sleep like the grave." The landlord replied, "Precisely. Now let's visit the realm of what temperature control. Because even if you're lying still, warmth or the lack thereof can ruin everything." Heated bricks and soapstones were common, placed at the foot of the bed and wrapped in wool. But the elite sought more elaborate methods. Enter the Sprisomoor scald bed. Despite its alarming name, the scald bed didn't involve burns. It was a dual-layer mattress system with a compartment for hot water beneath the sleeping surface. Think of it as an early waterbed with ambitions. Servants filled it with kettle after kettle of steaming water each night. The heat lasted several hours. So did the risk of a leak. By contrast, some households believed ikiais, cold, induced better rest. These people slept with open windows year-round, even in winter, covered in furs and belief. One aristocrat boasted of sleeping with nothing but a muslin sheet and moral clarity. Another trend involved weighted beddings, not unlike the modern weighted blanket. Quilts stuffed with sand or chainmail-style discs were believed to trap bad thoughts and excessive movement. One doctor described them as a physical command to surrender. And let's not forget on sleep orientation. Victorians held strong views about the direction your head faced. North was ideal, aligning your body with magnetic energy. East was acceptable, symbolic of birth and renewal. West-west was for corpses. No one wanted to wake up pointed toward death. You adjust your pillow now out of habit, maybe superstition, and you wonder what direction you're facing. Does it matter? Maybe not. But in the 1800s, it absolutely did. Some families even had us bed rotators, small devices under the bed that allowed the frame to be shifted with a turn of a crank. You could rotate yourself like a lazy sundial, seeking alignment with the cosmos, or simply avoiding a draft. And then there's the question of mattress materials. We've mentioned horsehair, but that was just the beginning. Corn husks, moss, straw, seaweed. Yes, seaweed were all stuffed into ticking for those who couldn't afford feathers. Seaweed was believed to be calming, absorbing the madness of the tides, as one oddly poetic mattress maker claimed. There were even mattresses filled with oasi corkina for the gentlest possible give. The downside, they creaked like whale song when sat upon. That's a historical fact and an acoustic nightmare. Fringe solutions abounded. Some insomniacs slept on slanted beds to promote digestive gravity. Others slept on metal mesh, believing it dispersed neural static. One inventor built a folding bed with a built-in metronome that ticked softly beneath your spine. He called it sleep by tempo. His wife called it divorce-worthy. Still, one thing unites all these attempts: the idea that the bed itself must do something. That passivity is not enough. That inaction is failure. That the very surface upon which you dream must pull its weight. It's funny, isn't it? For a culture so obsessed with stillness and propriety, the Victorians had a hard time letting go. They turned even their rest into performance. You lie back down. Your bed does not vibrate. It does not rock. It does not hiss steam through hidden tubes or smell of kelp. And that might just be why it works. You close your eyes and imagine what a bed must have meant back then. A status symbol, a science project, a soft cage. A place where night after night, Victorians wrestled with the one thing they could not outwit themselves. And maybe, just maybe, if they stopped inventing and started surrendering, they could have found sleep a little sooner. But then again, if they had, we'd have nothing to talk about. You roll over once more, the bedsheets rustling like dry leaves, and you let your thoughts drift further into the maze of Victorian sleep experiments. Just as you're beginning to think the bed might be fine, the drinks tolerable, and the distractions, well, at least quirky, you remember a strange sensation from earlier. A tingle. A little spark at your wrist when you brushed past the lamp base. The faint buzz that made your hairs stand up. And it hits you. We haven't yet arrived at electricity. Because yes, dear insomniac traveler, the Victorians didn't stop at beds or beverages. They were convinced they could zap insomnia right out of existence. Welcome to the era of electric sleep. Let's be clear, this wasn't the kind of electricity that powers your phone charger or refrigerator. No. This was raw, experimental, often homemade Victorian juice. Generated by hand-cranked dynamos stored in glass Leyden jars and delivered through strange devices with brass knobs and cotton cords. You are now the proud owner of a Yatis galvanic belt, marketed heavily in catalogs like Dr. Wadsworth's Electric Health Monthly. The galvanic belt was meant to be worn around the waist while you slept. It contained zinc and copper plates designed to generate a soothing, continuous current of moral vitality. Yes, moral vitality. Because in the Victorian mind, poor sleep was not just a physical issue, it hinted at emotional weakness or spiritual malaise. The sensation, according to diary entries, a mild tingling, a gentle heat behind the knees, or like being flirted with by a clockmaker. Of course, no two belts worked quite the same. Some required nightly soaking in vinegar. Others needed to be recharged by moonlight. One model, the Somnifixator, included a small bell that rang if the user moved too much, because obviously nothing helps sleep like an unexpected jingle near your kidneys. Historians debate whether these devices actually helped, or simply made people too distracted to focus on their insomnia. Some argue the placebo effect was strong enough to induce real rest. Others claim the belts were mild torture disguised as progress. But electrotherapy didn't stop there. For the more committed insomniac, there were electro-sleeping chambers. These were curtained bed cubicles fitted with copper wires and magnets woven into the mattress or walls. A central control panel allowed you to adjust the strength and frequency of the current, ideally tuning the brain to its proper resonance. One doctor swore by sleeping north-northeast at a frequency of 12 flickers per moonrise. Others preferred electropathic pads, cloth pouches containing minerals that buzzed faintly when warmed. These were tied around the temples or wrists. They looked like oven mitts. They felt like being hugged by a mildly nervous squirrel. Still others went full DIY. Newspapers published build-it-yourself sleep circuit diagrams. One article even offered the insomnia helmet complete with brass antennae and a grounding rod. Testimonials included, "I dreamed of green rivers and never once of creditors." My wife said I hummed pleasantly all night. Awoke with eyebrows singed but spirit refreshed. And while these devices rarely had medical approval, they gained a kind of cult following particularly among aging poets, eccentric baronesses and clergymen with waking visions. There's one curious case you remember, a man named Horace Lint, who claimed to cure his insomnia by sleeping with his feet submerged in water, attached via copper wires to a weather vane. When asked why, he replied, "Because storms have rhythm, and so should dreams." Was Horace a genius, a lunatic, a sleep hacker before his time? Hard to say. Of course, electricity wasn't the only method for stimulating sleep. There were also magnetic stones, supposedly blessed under full moons and wrapped in blue velvet. Lay one beneath each elbow, instructed one guide, and cross your fingers before speaking to your pillow. Then there was the Pomwix singing wire. A taut silver cord stretched across the headboard. As you drifted off, vibrations from the evening wind would cause it to hum softly like a lullaby from the furniture itself. And if that still didn't work, you'd visit Nasist, the sleep institutes. The first opened in Edinburgh, followed by Manchester and London. These were not hospitals exactly, nor were they hotels. They were something in between, part spa, part laboratory, part theater of dreams. Patients were encouraged to lie in specially prepared sleep booths, surrounded by calming sounds, wine chimes bubbling water-ticking metronomes. The air was scented with lavender and ozone. One room used trained pigeons to coo rhythmically from hidden alcoves. You were handed a small dial. If you felt drowsy, you turned it once to the right. If you needed help, once to the left. If you were startled awake by pigeon coos, you rang a little silver bell labeled again. Did it work sometimes, especially when you believed it would? And that's the quiet truth behind these electrical dreams. Most Victorian sleep cures, whether belts or feathers poppies or pigeons, only helped if your mind believed in them. It wasn't just the body being soothed. It was the story. The narrative that said, you're doing something, you're trying. Sleep will come because you've earned it. And that's still true, isn't it? Maybe your device doesn't hum with galvanic power. Maybe it's just your fan or the slow rhythm of this story. But the goal is the same. To convince the body that rest is safe, that surrender is possible. You settle back under the covers. The air is still. Somewhere a wire might be singing. Or maybe it's just your breath finally slowing. You wake from something that wasn't quite sleep. More like a long blink. Your body remains heavy content, but your mind has drifted back to the edge of awareness, like a tide returning to shore. And there it is again, a feeling. Not a jolt, not a nightmare. Just a quiet tension in the room. Like someone watching. Like someone waiting. You sit up slowly and remember, tu vois, you're a woman in Victorian England. And you've just been prescribed bed rest. Now don't panic. You're not sick in the traditional sense. Not coughing, not feverish. But you've been nervous. Perhaps overwhelmed. Tearful without cause. Prone to fidgeting, letter writing, and long walks at inappropriate hours. You might have even spoken too quickly at dinner. So, the doctor came. A man with a walrus mustache and a black bag full of camphor drops and deep certainty. He inspected your hands, asked you how often you cried, made a note about your vital reserves, and now you're here, in bed. All day, all night, possibly for months. Welcome to the strange, silent world of Victorian hysteria treatment. This condition, thought to afflict primarily women of intellect, ambition, or emotion, was considered a disturbance of the female nervous system. The cure, absolute stillness. You're not to read, not to speak excessively, not to walk, climb stairs, or open your own curtains. You are to rest fully and passively until the nerves quiet. The logic, if your body rests, your spirit will follow. Your meals arrive on porcelain trays, milk toast, broths, occasionally a poached egg. Rich foods are forbidden. Spices excite the imagination. You are allowed to write a single letter per week, but only if it's not emotional. And heaven forbid you try to write fiction. You're allowed to listen, softly, to the wind through the window, or perhaps the faint pluck of piano keys downstairs. But your hands must remain still, folded. One woman was scolded for embroidery. "Too stirring to the blood," said the nurse. Historians have debated for decades whether the rest cure helped or harmed. Some women reported emerging calmer, more composed. Others emerged angry, restless, or forever changed. In modern eyes, it's often seen as cruel and enforced silencing of voices that were too loud for comfort. But within the framework of its time, the rest cure was serious, respected medicine. And not just for women. Though men were rarely diagnosed with hysteria, they had their own diagnoses. Nervous exhaustion, melancholia, neurasthenia. Their cures also involved quiet, but in a different flavor. Where women were confined, men were re-rooted. You picture him now, a gentleman in his late 40s, tired eyes, too many board meetings, too many telegrams. He's sent away not to bed, but to the seaside, or to a walking tour in the Alps, or more modestly to play slow chess at the local gentleman's club until the fog lifts. And if none of that works, he sees a nerve specialist, who recommends inhaling pine resin, keeping a journal of non-philosophical thoughts, and avoiding politics entirely. Yes, politics were considered a trigger for male sleeplessness. Still, it's the women who stayed in bed. The most infamous case might be that of Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who endured months of enforced bed rest under the orders of Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell. No reading, no writing, just lying there slowly unraveling. She later wrote The Yellow Wallpaper, a chilling short story about a woman trapped in a room slowly going mad as she watches the wallpaper patterns crawl. Victorian medicine, where the cure was often the cause. And then there were the shadow treatments. Quietly suggested, never advertised. One involved cold compresses to the temples, soaked in rosewater and opium tincture. Another involved hypnotic suggestion, whispered at dusk by trained professionals who spoke only in metaphors. Your eyes are curtains. They'd murmur. Draw them closed. You lie back now, imagining your own treatment. You're on the 3rd week of rest. The birds still sing outside your window, though you're no longer sure which season it is. You've memorized the crack in the ceiling plaster. You know when the kettle will whistle, when the maid coughs, when the wind changes. You're not sad exactly, just still. And while this enforced stillness feels like a punishment, it's also something else. A mirror, a magnifier, a strange kind of dream. Because in this silence you've begun to hear things, the stories in the wind. The voice of your body unhurried. The pulse of time, no longer measured in schedules, but in shadows on the wall. The world has slowed. The nerves perhaps too. And while we know, this is not the answer for everyone. There's something to be said for the idea of deliberate rest. For doing nothing, and letting that be enough. You close your eyes now. The birds are still singing. The breeze still moves. But you are still. Held. Quiet. Maybe this is what sleep wanted from the beginning. Not a trick, not a cure, just permission. The sun, pale and distant, creeps over your windowsill like a reluctant guest. You stir not because of noise or urgency, but because the silence has grown too perfect. You blink once, then twice, and realize you're still in bed, but something has changed. You're wearing a pipe. Not lit, of course. Just resting between your lips like a prop in a one-man stage play called Freeze. How Victorian gentlemen dealt with sleeplessness. Because while women were being assigned bed rest and silence, men, especially those of a certain social standing, were given more active forms of insomnia treatment. Forms that looked suspiciously like leisure. Let's take a slow, smoky walk through the sleepless world of the Victorian man. You rise, pull on your dressing gown, perhaps silk, perhaps thick plaid flannel depending on your sensibilities, and descend to the drawing room. It's late, but you're not alone. The coals still glow in the fireplace. On the sideboard, a decanter of port. On the table, an unfinished game of chess. This was the Victorian gentleman's version of melatonin and chill. Pipe smoking. Particularly, a well-packed bowl of latakia, or Turkish blend, was thought to settle the nerves and regulate the breath. A man with a pipe claimed one 1884 etiquette guide is halfway to sleep by his 3rd exhale. And if the pipe didn't do the trick, well then you turn to Hugh walking. Not brisk walks for cardio, not solemn processions. These were slow, deliberate, vaguely philosophical strolls through lamplit parks or along cobbled avenues. Perambulations, they were sometimes called. The thinking was that mild exertion, preferably at a dignified pace, and ideally while contemplating the empire or the latest commentary in Punch, would tire the body without inflaming the senses. You picture yourself now, cane in hand, hat slightly askew, wandering past ivy-covered iron gates and quiet shop fronts. The city is sleeping. The dogs are curled tight in corners. You are the only soul awake, and somehow that feels just fine. Historians are divided on how effective these nocturnal rambles were. Some say it gave the brain a rhythmic outlet. Others claim it simply delayed the inevitable toss-and-turn marathon. But one thing's certain, it was seen as a manly solution. Women were to lie still. Men were to move, ponder, puff, and pace. But there were other male-specific remedies, too. Billiards by lamplight became a recommended pastime for the sleepless elite. Gentle competition, low lighting, and the quiet clack of ivory balls was considered a mild hypnotic for the overtaxed brain. In private clubs, especially in London, there were entire rooms dedicated to midnight relaxation. Plush chairs, footstools, and muted wallpaper in shades of olive and navy. A roaring fire. No music, no conversation unless initiated with a raised eyebrow and murmured "still can't sleep." Chessboards were left half-finished, journals left open beside ashtrays, and most importantly, no clocks. Timepieces were covered with velvet or turned face down. If a man knows the hour, said one club steward, he's already lost to wakefulness. Now and then, the insomniac gentleman would turn to journaling. But not the emotional kind. No confessions, no soul-searching, just observations. Page after page of what the milkman said. How the ivy grew crooked that week. The smell of the garden soil after rain. One particularly charming example is a diary found in Yorkshire dated 1879. The man never gave his name, only initials TGW, but he left nightly entries that read like poetic grocery lists. Could not sleep. Drank barley water. Cat appeared disturbed. Smelled lavender, though none is planted near. Considered moving the chair. Did not. That's it. That's the whole entry. And somehow it's enough. Because sleep doesn't always follow excitement. Sometimes it follows tedium. Repetition. The slow unpacking of harmless thought. You lean back in your chair now, real or imagined, and consider your own insomnia. Are you thinking too much or not enough? Some Victorian doctors believed that male sleeplessness came from tumoral digestion. That is an overfull mind. Too many facts, not enough meaning. The cure. Read aloud to yourself, but only from neutral texts. An atlas. A list of parliamentary seats. The full botanical names of garden herbs. One Londoner claimed he could never get past the letter C in Chambers's Cyclopedia of Trade and Invention without dozing off. And then there was the tobacco origami. Yes, it's real. A handful of pipe smokers believed in folding tobacco pouches into elaborate shapes, snails' teacups, tiny boots while reciting nursery rhymes backwards. The combination of scent motion and absurdity supposedly lulled the mind into quiet surrender. Did it work? Who knows? But no one could accuse them of not trying. You close your imaginary notebook. You stub out your pipe. You push the bishop gently across the board and whisper, "Check." No one responds. The fire is low now. Your slippers are warm. Your body feels heavier. And even if the chess game is unfinished, the walk unwalked, and the lavender imagined, you've performed the ritual. You've filled the time between night and not night, and maybe that's all sleep ever asked of you. You're back in bed, or at least back near it, reclining, draped really across something that isn't quite a bed, but not exactly a chair either. It's a fainting couch, and if you're being honest, it's doing a better job than either. Let's pause for a moment and consider this elegant invention, because it holds a peculiar place in the Victorian sleep story. Neither medical nor decorative, neither private nor public. The fainting couch straddled the line between function and performance, and it was everywhere. You find yourself nestled into one now, high-backed on one end, no back on the other, upholstered in velvet with carved wooden legs and a firm, gently sloping seat that insists you recline tastefully, not flop. In the parlors of the well-to-do, this couch was more than decor. It was an escape hatch, a retreat, a place to pretend you weren't drifting off in front of guests, or to signal without saying a word that your body was gently rebelling against polite society. The name, of course, is a misdirection. You're not fainting. You're retreating. Quietly, gracefully, and possibly with a hand on your forehead for dramatic flair. But there's more here. Much more. Because for many Victorians, especially women, the fainting couch wasn't just furniture. It was hori, the only socially acceptable place to rest during daylight. Beds were for nighttime. Bedrooms were private. To lie down in the day, especially in front of company, invited judgment unless it was on this. The fainting couch became a kind of coded permission, a decorative loophole in the architecture of exhaustion. So there you are, reclining beneath an embroidered shawl, a book balanced loosely on your chest. Perhaps you've just completed a polite breakfast, or a difficult paragraph of Middlemarch. Either way, you've earned this. In this space, you're not quite doing nothing. You are fainting, which implies fragility, delicacy, and most importantly, a reason. Of course, not all couches were created equal. Upper-class homes often had more than one each, tailored to its room and purpose. The formal fainting couch in the parlor, the intimate one in the morning room, even a miniature in the dressing room upholstered in blue damask and reserved for sudden corset-related oxygen issues, and for the truly fashion-forward, the kiosque. Rest settee. A longer version placed under a window to encourage languid reading and meaningful sighing. You could spend a whole afternoon on one, reclining, gazing, perhaps practicing the ancient art of not quite napping. Which, as it happens, became a Victorian pastime in itself. Day rest. Distinct from sleep was a wellness trend among the more sensitive classes. especially in households where spiritualism, poetry, or advanced embroidery were considered acceptable callings. Doctors sometimes prescribed it. Not sleep, not bed rest, just a kind of suspended activity performed horizontally. And the fainting couch was perfect for it. It allowed you to listen to the rain, to watch dust motes and sunbeams, to sigh theatrically while your sister read aloud from a gardening almanac. Was it restful? Who knows? Was it performative? Absolutely. But sleep and performance have always been odd bedfellows. Even so, these couches weren't just the domain of women. Men used them too often in libraries, studies, or smoking rooms, though they were rarely called fainting couches. For men, the same shape became a recumbent lounger. Or in more poetic circles, a thought bench. Yes, thought bench. You imagine yourself stretched across one now, boots crossed at the ankle, a half-read volume of The Spectator on your stomach. The fire crackles. The gas lamp hums. You might not be sleeping, but you're definitely unconscious of the clock. Still, let's not forget the role of the couch in Hawes' dream work. Many Victorian spiritualists believed that midday rest allowed the mind to cross into other dimensions. Not sleep exactly, but a drift into the unseen. One medium described her fainting couch as the bridge between this world and the whispering one. She claimed her most vivid visions came not during deep sleep, but during shallow recline at 4 p.m. Historians remain skeptical, but the idea of threshold rest. Neither waking nor dreaming has endured. Today we might call it liminal space, or meditative stillness, or more plainly, the perfect nap you almost have right before someone rings the doorbell. In Victorian times, though, this twilight state was revered, courted, even ritualized. Some households set specific hours for couch lounging. 2:15 to 3:00, curtains drawn, conversations soft. Tea steeped but never poured. You simply lay there semi-present, surrounded by the decorum of almost sleep. And perhaps that's where you are now. Your body isn't asking for full slumber. Just stillness, a pause, a breath. The upholstery creaks softly beneath you. The ticking of the hallway clock fades into the background. Someone murmurs in the next room, too quiet to follow. You blink once, then again. And maybe you don't need a bed after all. Just a place to stop pretending you're not tired. You remain half reclined, your body pleasantly heavy, and your thoughts a slow, drifting mist. There's no need to move just yet. But while your eyes rest, your mind wanders to childhood perhaps, or to a time when the rules of sleep were simpler, softer, and imposed upon you by adults with firm voices and inexplicable faith in spooning. Tonight, you find yourself transported to a place rarely mentioned in history books, the long, narrow dormitories of Victorian boarding schools. Wooden floors, iron-framed beds lined in 2 neat rows, and tucked inside each one children like you trying very hard not to giggle. Because while sleep was enforced with military precision, the methods were, let's say, quaint. Welcome to the world of its Victorian sleep etiquette for children. The idea wasn't just to rest. It was to train the body in proper sleep conduct. School manuals insisted that good character began with good posture, even in unconsciousness. Boys were told to sleep with their hands at their sides, feet straight, and mouths firmly shut. Girls with arms crossed gently over the chest as if in polite prayer. And yes, siblings or roommates were often encouraged to spoon, not as affection, but as geometry. Backs to fronts promote warmth alignment and efficient bedding, explained one dormitory supervisor in a letter to the Practical Household Review. The closer you were to your bunkmate, the better. 2 hearts beat as one the handbook read. 3 with practice. Now this wasn't universal. Wealthier schools offered curtained sleeping cubicles with individual cots, while rural ones packed 4 or 5 to a mattress, especially during colder months. But across the board, discipline reigned. Talking after lights out punishable. Reading by candle stub under the sheets, grounds for a confiscated Bible. One poor lad in Bristol was made to copy Psalm 119 backwards, after whispering a joke about cheese dreams during devotions. And yet these dormitories were full of contradictions. Rules were strict, but the sleep itself often deep. Exhaustion helped, of course. Victorian children lived busy lives mourning drills. Latin memorization, embroidery, or carpentry lessons, chapel character inspection, handwriting recitation, and mealtime etiquette drills that left even the forks exhausted. By bedtime, most children collapsed, rather than drifted. But when sleep wouldn't come, there were cures. Some schools kept a tin of licorice drops by the fire for those who claimed nervousness. Others allowed a teacher to sit and read a dull passage from Pliny, the Roman naturalist whose work was the literary equivalent of a glass of milk. One headmistress favored Sioux group humming. Low, slow tones shared across beds, creating a soft, sleepy drone that she insisted tuned the spine. And in the rarest cases, comfort objects. Yes, even in the age of stiff collars and stiff upper lips, children sometimes clutched toys or tokens in the dark. A small wooden dog, a tassel from a curtain, a dried orange rind with initials carved inside. One diary written by a 12-year-old girl named Hetty mentions her sleepstone, a smooth river pebble kept under her pillow that keeps bad dreams in its belly. Historians speculate it may have been a superstition brought from her grandmother, or perhaps just a bedtime placebo with excellent branding. There were also bedtime prayers recited by rote, and not always sincerely. "If I should die before I wake" was less comforting than intended. So some teachers adjusted the phrasing. "Guide my sleep, guard my breath, grant me dreams, delay my death." Somehow, gentler. But in every case, the goal was the same: order through sleep. The Victorians believed that if a child learned how to sleep properly, quietly, still without fuss or interruption, that discipline would spill over into all other areas of life. School reports even included Sissym's restfulness scores. Too much tossing and turning a mark against, sighing in the night note as sign of weak constitution, fidgeting at dawn, advise cod liver oil and poetry abstinence. And yet, even within this rigid framework, children found magic. They whispered stories after the monitor left, secret codes under blankets. Rhymes passed from bunk to bunk about dream beasts and star ladders. The bed became a theater, a confessional, a boat on a great sea of whispered nonsense. Some even developed elaborate internal rituals. Tap the bedpost twice. Count to 5. Think of the same dog every night. Imagine a tunnel beneath the dormitory that leads to another world. None of this was sanctioned, of course, but it was real. It was the child's response to rules too large to bend. You turn slightly now, your limbs remembering their own bedtime sequence. Not strict like the schoolboys, but deliberate, familiar. There's comfort in repetition, in knowing what comes next. And as your thoughts drift gently toward dreams, you wonder, who did you sleep beside? What stories did you whisper? And where exactly did that tunnel lead? The answers aren't important. Only the stillness is. The room is hushed now, except for the occasional pop of cooling wood from the hearth. Your limbs are heavy with stillness, but your mind, ever curious, tugs you onward. Not forward this time, but upward. To the palace. Yes, the gaslit bedroom of a monarch. Tonight, you are not a governess, nor a gentleman, nor a schoolchild, murmuring poems into a stiff pillow. Tonight, you are a quiet observer, standing at the threshold of Queen Victoria's bedroom. Do not step too loudly. The palace is silent after 9 p.m., and the Queen dislikes disruptions once her ladies-in-waiting have dimmed the final lamp. Her sleep is not to be trifled with, which is ironic considering how much she struggled with it. The sovereign herself, Queen Victoria, was often plagued by poor sleep. Her habits, kept meticulously in letters, journals, and the reports of those around her paint a picture of a ruler caught between relentless duty and a desperate craving for rest. She preferred to sleep in a wonky, modest, canopied bed. Not grand by royal standards, but private. Its heavy curtains were not just decorative. They were protection from draft's light and according to some unwelcome spirits. The Queen believes firmly in a full enclosure of sleep, noted one lady-in-waiting. Both physical and moral. Her bedtime routine was a slow cascade of rituals. First, the removal of countless layers. Corset, unlaced petticoats, peeled away pins placed in neat rows on a silver tray. Then a tepid bath drawn by her maid. No scents, no salts, only warmth. Afterward, the Queen would sit at her dressing table, write in her diary every single night, without exception, and sip a mug of the beef tea. a curious beverage somewhere between broth and potion believed to be grounding. Strength-giving, she once described it. Not delicious, but honest. She insisted on fresh air in her bedroom even during the coldest months. A window always cracked, just enough for the wind to sigh through. Palace staff grumbled about the wasted coal, but the queen insisted it helped her sleep. Whether it did or not remains unclear. Her letters speak often of difficult nights. Sometimes grief woke her memories of Albert, whose death haunted her dreams for decades. She would wake weeping, clutching his nightshirt, which she kept beneath her pillow, long after his passing. Other nights, it was indigestion, or sick worry, or occasionally, Parliament. But she had her cures. A favorite was to summon her Scotsman's servant, John Brown, for a late conversation or even a walk in the corridors. They rarely discussed politics. More often, the weather horses in sleep. She also kept a collection of herbal pillows, each filled with a different blend: hops and chamomile for calm rose and mint for melancholy sage and lavender for winter colds. The queen prefers her remedies floral and firm, wrote one chambermaid. And when even the herbs failed, she turned to hot music, not grand concertos, not church hymns, but simple lullabies played on piano by a lady-in-waiting just beyond the door. The queen believed music softened the air and invited dreams gently without alarm. Yet her sleep remained fragile. Travel made it worse. On state visits, she insisted on her personal bedding transported ahead of her entourage. The royal mattress was triple-layered and stuffed with a blend of wool and goose down. No foreign bed has yet respected Her Majesty's spine-noted one courtier in 1867. The Queen's sleep charts, yes, she kept them tracked disturbances meticulously. The phase of the moon, the day's conversations, what she ate, who she spoke to. Once she recorded that a sharp whisper from a servant at 2:12 a.m. disrupted an otherwise perfect doze. The servant was reassigned. Historians debate whether Queen Victoria had chronic insomnia or was simply a restless person living an overfilled life. Some point to sos melancholia, others to hormonal imbalances, others still to sheer monarchical anxiety. But no matter the cause, one thing remains: she tried. Oh, how she tried. She burned blue lamps to calm her nerves, wore gloves filled with camphor paste, had her feet rubbed nightly with bay leaf oil by her maid. Once she even attempted an experimental vibration couch brought by a German inventor, though it was removed after 2 uses due to a most improper humming. And through it all she wrote of her nights, her dreams, her exhaustion. The night was long, the hours most reluctant to pass. The air held breath, but no kindness. And in this vulnerability beneath the crown, beyond the portraits, she became simply another soul unable to shut the mind off when the body begged to. Another Victorian lying in darkness, searching the ceiling for rest. And tonight she feels closer than ever. So you lie still. You think of her candles, her cracked window, her feather pillow with pressed violets sewn inside. You wonder what she would make of your own nightly struggle, your own rituals, your own strange blend of herbs and hope. And you suspect she would understand. The palace fades. The violet-scented pillows, the softly murmured lullabies, the gentle rustle of royal sheets gone now. And in their place, footsteps. Measured, echoing, solitary footsteps on damp stone. You're no longer reclining, but one walking. And not as a restless gentleman this time. You carry no pipeware, no silken robe. You wear a uniform, a long coat, a cap, and a key ring that jingles faintly with every step. You are a swart night watchman retour in Victorian London, and you will not be sleeping. Tonight, you are one of the many people whose job it is to stay awake while others dream. The streets are dark. Gas lamps flicker. Mist curls around gutters and doorways. You walk with purpose, not out of urgency, but routine. This is your rhythm now. Every hour on the hour you pass the same bakery, the same grocer's shuttered stall, the same alley where cats scuffle over invisible feasts. Sleep, that's a luxury for other people. The Victorian night was not as silent as we imagine. It belonged to people like you, the ones paid to keep vigil. Lamplighters roamed before midnight, extinguishing flames one by one. Their long poles clicked gently against metal fixtures. Watchmen. Like you, patrolled estates, factories, and train yards. Your job was not to fight crime necessarily, but to be seen, to walk, to exist in motion so others could rest in stillness. Some nights you were the only one who noticed the loose shutter, the bent lock, the smell of gas. Other nights you walked simply to keep from freezing. Your boots are lined with straw. Your coat smells faintly of oil and bread. In your pocket, a half-eaten meat pie, still warm, wrapped in waxed paper. You are not heroic, you are not important, but you are present. And in the Victorian night, that was something sacred. In larger cities, night porters kept similar hours, stationed at hotels, banks, libraries. Their tools, a logbook, a brass bell, and sometimes a small tin of strong black tea to sip when the yawns became dangerous. One porter in Manchester kept himself awake by memorizing the Latin names of moths he saw fluttering near the lamps. He wrote them phonetically on scraps of newspaper, and later tattooed the most beautiful ones onto his forearm. That story is true, or it should be. And then there were the psquaku, midwives, the nurses, the railway men, the coal stokers, all working while the rest of the world slept, not because of sleeplessness, but necessity. Sleep for them was fragmented, stolen, rarely sacred. Some night workers adopted peculiar strategies to mimic normalcy. One watchman hung blackout curtains in his modest flat and insisted the postman whisper through the letter slot. Another placed a spoon under his pillow before sleeping, believing it summoned dreams quickly so he could get back to work sooner. Historians still debate whether Victorian shift workers experienced chronic sleep deprivation or simply adapted to a different rhythm. But let's not forget the strangest sleepless role of all, the knocker-up. In towns, before alarm clocks were widespread, people hired someone to come tap on their window in the early morning hours, with a long pole sometimes tipped with wire, sometimes with a pea shooter. You imagine her now. Yes, her for many. Knockers-up were women walking the cobbled lanes at 3 a.m., counting windows, peering up, and knocking precisely the number of times agreed upon. Tap, tap, tap. Wake up, Mr. Higgins. Tap, 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 tap. Time for the bakery, Miss Wren. She would sleep in the afternoon, perhaps curled by a fire while others toiled. And this reversal, this strange dance of vigilance and collapse, was its own kind of order. A world turned upside down to keep another running. So, while Queen Victoria nestled into Goosedown and gentlemen sipped port beside chessboards, the sleepers slept because someone else didn't. And you tonight are one of those people. You tighten your coat. Your breath fogs in the air. Somewhere a bell chimes the hour. You note it. Nod. Continue. Perhaps you'll find rest tomorrow morning. Or perhaps, like so many others, you'll lie awake anyway. Because sometimes the body forgets how to switch back. One doctor of the time claimed that night laborers developed a reversed nervous elegance, a phrase he used to mean that their brains pulsed with thought precisely when the sun came up. And when the city stirred and the children yawned and the newspapers flapped onto doorsteps, the night watchman would finally hang up his coat. Not tired, not alert, just hollowed out. You feel that now, don't you? A softness behind the eyes, a quiet that goes deeper than silence. That rare fatigue that isn't weakness, but proof. Proof that you were here, that you bore witness to the night, that you stayed awake, so others didn't have to. It's nearly morning now, at least your body thinks so. There's that particular quiet, the kind that hangs just before birds begin. You've traveled far tonight, through parlors and palaces, lamplit alleys and lavender-scented beds. But now we arrive at perhaps the strangest corner of the Victorian sleep story. No, not remedies. Not positions or postures or fainting couches. Tonight, we pull back the blankets on something far more revealing. Victorian sleepwear. And trust me, it mattered. Because in an age obsessed with appearance and propriety, your choice of night clothes was not simply about comfort. It was about morality class and character. Even in unconsciousness, one was expected to dress with dignity. So what are you wearing? If you're a gentleman of means, you might don a linen nightshirt. Thigh-length buttoned halfway down, often embroidered with your initials, and stitched just stiff enough to make sure it didn't suggest anything. Color white, of course. Purity demanded nothing less. Any splash of color was considered bohemian, at best sinful, at worst. Beneath the nightshirt, absolutely nothing. Or if you were particularly modest, long underdrawers, tied delicately at the waist with ribbons. Not strings. Ribbons. And your feet. Slippers, ideally quilted. Bed socks. If you suffered from cold toes or a sensitive constitution, both of which were astonishingly common diagnoses among middle-aged men with leisure time. But perhaps you're not a man. You are instead a young woman in a well-ventilated drawing room preparing for bed. Your maid assists you because removing the layers of the day was no small feat. Corset laces petticoats, stays chemise stockings, boots. It's like peeling an onion with etiquette. Eventually you arrive at your spur out of nightgown. Usually floor length, always high-necked, sometimes trimmed with lace at the collar and cuffs. Cotton was common flannel in winter. Silk reserved for honeymoon nights and holiday portraits. Even in sleep you were expected to protect your modesty, from whom no one would say. But best not to take chances. Some women added a nightcap tied snugly under the chin. The idea was to preserve heat, and more importantly, to keep hair from misbehaving. Hair was a serious matter. It was brushed 50 times, of course, then braided or wrapped in rags for curl preservation. Bedhead was not yet fashionable. Men wore nightcaps too, though not always by choice. Baldness was believed to worsen with night drafts, so gentlemen of a certain age swaddled their heads in wool, often resembling medieval jesters by accident. Still awake, you're in good company, because beneath all this fabric, there was anxiety. What if you were needed in the night? A fire, a visitor, a knock at the door. Your nightwear had to be presentable, dignified. You couldn't very well greet the vicar in a chemise stitched with forget-me-nots and scandal. And heaven forbid a guest required assistance to the chamber pot. You had to appear clothed, composed, and Christian. That's why many households wore house robes, or sour bed jackets, garments designed specifically for midnight emergencies. A halfway point between nightgown and tea dress, enough to allow you to light a candle and say, "Yes, I'll fetch the maid," without falling into disrepute. Of course, sleepwear varied wildly by class. The working poor often slept in what they wore during the day undergarments or basic shifts. Nightshirts, if owned, were sometimes shared among siblings or spouses. Some folk believed that sleeping fully clothed helped ward off evil spirits. Others simply couldn't afford laundry. Meanwhile, the upper crust commissioned custom task night ensembles. Entire coordinated sets complete with monogrammed handkerchiefs and matching slippers. Some even ordered morning nightwear. Black-edged garments for grieving in sleep. Yes, Victorians mourned in their dreams too. One notable eccentric and aging banker in Sussex had 7 identical sleeping suits, one for each day of the week, all embroidered with the day's name. On Sundays he wore gray flannel to symbolize Sabbath somberness. On Fridays blue to reflect the sky he never saw. Historians still debate whether he was deeply religious, deeply anxious, or just very bored. Then of course there was the horrid moral panic, because if sleepwear could reflect virtue, then it could also invite vice. Novels of the time hinted darkly at women who wore red silk robes after midnight. The kind of woman one protagonist mutters in a Wilkie Collins mystery, whose hemline whispered too much. Even advertisements walked a fine line. Drape yourself in the elegance of chastity. Read one ad for lace-trimmed bedwear. Modest yet lovely. A dream your soul may wear. That ad sold thousands, but not everyone conformed. Artists, poets, foreigners. They slept differently. One French actress visiting London scandalized a host family by requesting no bedclothes at all, just a bearskin and an open window. The host's daughter reported it in her journal as a horrifying French-induced rebellion against God. Another writer, an American transcendentalist, preferred to sleep in a muslin tunic with rose petals sewn inside. He claimed it kept his dreams near the flowers. Was he mocked? Absolutely, but he slept like a stone. And now perhaps you're ready to choose your own sleeping garment. A plain cotton nightshirt, a robe of flannel, or maybe dare you a tunic with secret pockets of crushed lavender. Because in the end, what you wear to bed isn't just about warmth. It's about with safety, identity, intention. To dress for sleep in the Victorian mind was to acknowledge that rest is deserved, not accidental. That we may prepare for it, court it, welcome it, like a house guest or a loyal dog curled at the hearth. So as you settle back beneath the covers, dressed in whatever your imagination prefers, remember this: you are not only clothed, you are ready. You're warm now, properly swaddled, your fictional nightshirt tucked just so under the covers. But something still stirs something that doesn't care for flannel cotton, or even the scent of lavender sachets. A noise, a low nasal rumble, not from the window, not from outside. No, this sound is far more personal. Someone in your imagined Victorian home is a kauiula snoring. And in this candlelit age of elegance and repression, snoring wasn't just inconvenient. It was a moral failing. Welcome to the great snore panic of Victorian England. Snoring to a modern mind is just a nuisance, a minor domestic war fought in bedrooms across the globe. But to the Victorians it suggested far more: a body lacking discipline, a soul with loosened seams, and worst of all, a person vulnerable to public embarrassment. Etiquette guides issued firm warnings. A gentleman must master his posture and his palate to avoid nocturnal disgrace. And for women, even stricter. A lady who snores may never marry, or if wed may find herself quietly widowed. Snores were classified, if you can believe it. Whistlers, gurglemen, gastral bleaters, and the dreaded sawyers who allegedly imitated the rhythm of a woodsman felling a pine. And yes, this was documented. In The Gentlewoman's Companion to Domestic Observances, one physician-turned-moralist described 6 types of snore complete with diagrams and remedies. You couldn't make this up. But the big question remained: how do you stop it? The Victorians had answers. Let's begin with the IAS snore harness. Picture a corset for the throat leather or cotton buckled under the chin designed to keep the jaw closed and discourage mouth breathing. Dignified sleep, one advertisement promised, without compromise to your marriage. It worked if you didn't mind waking up feeling like you'd wrestled a chimney sweep. Another invention. The anti-snore pillow. Shaped like a wedge of cheese, it forced the sleeper onto their side. Some models included an embedded brass rod that lightly pressed into the ribs if the user dared roll over. The early prototype was named the Chastener. It did not catch on. There was also nose oil. Applied with a dainty silver wand, this concoction of peppermint clove and sometimes whale oil was meant to lubricate the nostrils. Promotes elegant airflow, the label insisted. Best stored in a cool drawer far from guests. But perhaps the most dramatic solution: surgical intervention. In the 1870s, a growing number of snore surgeons offered to shave or cauterize parts of the soft palate, promising silence and salvation in equal measure. Results varied. One man reportedly developed a sneeze so loud it was heard 3 houses away. Still, many believed it was worth it. Because snoring wasn't just irritating, it was socially disastrous. Entire sleep arrangements were based on it. In wealthier households, couples often maintained separate bedrooms. Not for modesty or convenience, but because one partner couldn't be trusted to remain silent through the night. "My husband's roar shakes," the wainscoting, wrote Lady Penelope Gratch in a letter to her sister. "We sleep apart now, and the marriage has improved in every measurable way. Even in boarding houses, rooms were sometimes assigned based on reputation. Quiet sleepers upstairs, the rest to the garden wing. And if you were a guest, you might find a small sign discreetly placed on your bedside table. Please alert staff if your dreams exceed an audible threshold." Historians debate the root of this obsession. Was it about control class? The need to tame even the body's unconscious outbursts? Likely all of the above. Victorians clung to the belief that a virtuous person should sleep silently. Like a saint in a painting, a noisy sleeper, then, was suspect. Undisciplined, possibly harboring secret appetites. One satirical journal even published a mock courtroom scene titled "The Trial of Sir Ronald Hissings," in which the defendant was convicted of social violence via nasal artillery. It's funny now, but then deadly serious. And yet, despite the panic, despite the harnesses, rods, oils, and surgeries, snoring persisted. Because snoring, like dreaming, defies etiquette. It reminds us that sleep is not a performance. it is raw, bodily human. Even Queen Victoria reportedly snored during her later years. A loyal maid once claimed it sounded like a lion purring through a lace curtain. The royal physician advised early supper and less mustard. Did it help? Probably not. But the story persists quietly like a hum beneath the floorboards. And now, as you lie there, you realize that perhaps someone nearby, your imagined bunkmate, your Victorian self, the ghost of your sleep-deprived watchman, is snoring softly. Not disruptively. Just enough to say, I'm still here. And maybe that's what sleep is too. A rumble. A sign. A reminder that even in the dark, even wrapped in flannel and fear and lace, the body will do what it must to keep dreaming. Even if it makes a little noise along the way, the quiet returns as it always does. You shift beneath your imagined quilt, perhaps still chuckling at the memory of nasal artillery, and breathe deeper, slower. But now, the room feels warmer, heavier, more humid. That's because your bed tonight has moved again. We're no longer in foggy England. We've followed the Queen's emissaries, the traitors, the missionaries, the officers, and the hopeful to the edges of empire. Welcome to the tropical colonies, and welcome too to the peculiar, uncomfortable, sleepless nights of the British abroad. Because if you thought sleep was difficult in your own bed, imagine trying it in a foreign land beneath mosquito netting, surrounded by insects the size of cufflinks, and weather that refused to cool. Colonial insomnia wasn't just a nuisance, it was often reported as a near mystical affliction. In letters, diaries, and shipping reports, exhausted Britons in India, West Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean described long, sticky nights filled with sweat fear and confusion. Heat like a shout, wrote one colonial officer stationed outside of Bombay. Even the shadows refused to lie still. Let's talk first about the Quezfiums. A proper colonial sleeping arrangement was not just a mattress. It was a Isa's campaign of defense. First, you had your mosquito netting, draped from the ceiling, tucked tightly under the mattress. Then a charpoy, a traditional Indian rope bed brought in for airflow. Above it, a punkah fan, operated slowly by a servant or mechanical pulley, swaying gently like the breath of a bored god. And beneath it, bugs. So many bugs. Lizards on the walls, ants in the sheets, and always, somewhere nearby, the distant, maddening buzz of a mosquito that hadn't been caught. To combat this, many colonials developed rituals so elaborate they resembled military maneuvers. One woman described powdering her feet with borax, tucking cinnamon bark into the folds of her nightdress, and placing a mango leaf on her forehead to cool the fire of dreams. Whether it worked is beside the point, it made her feel armed. Then there was the humidity. No one slept well when their pillow sweated before they did. Some households stuffed pillows with dried coconut husks or cooled clay beads, both of which made lying down feel like embracing a pot of mulch. Still better than goose down that clung to the skin like guilt. Let's not forget the sounds. Cicadas droned like tiny violins. Monkeys screamed at nothing. Birds called out as if rehearsing for opera. In West Africa, a soldier once described the night as filled with invisible teeth. And if the wildlife didn't wake you, your own body might. Digestive unrest was common, colonial diets being equal parts experimentation and accident. Spices unfamiliar to British guts led to rumbling bloating and the kind of dreams one escaped from. Some colonials turned to brandy and soda, others to Juan's quinine tonic, others still to sandalwood oil and prayers. A few abandoned all effort and simply slept during the day, retreating to hammocks in shaded verandas and wrapping their heads in damp cloth, which of course only made Orr's nighttime insomnia worse. It wasn't all discomfort, though. Many colonials discovered quite by accident local remedies far older and wiser than anything brought from home. In Ceylon, they drank a tea of unboiled pandan leaves. In Java, banana bark smoke was believed to lull the heart. In Ghana, elders recommended placing a stone under your bed to weigh down dreams that wander. Historians debate whether these cures worked or whether they simply offered narrative of controls, something the colonists desperately needed in lands they rarely understood. Because deeper than the heat, the insects, or the indigestion was Iya's dislocation. Sleep, after all, is about surrender. And surrender comes harder when you're surrounded by unfamiliar language, food soil, and stars. Many colonial officers wrote about feeling watched. Not by people necessarily, but by the land itself. A sense that the jungle or the desert was quietly observing their fragility. They rarely said it directly, but their diaries hum with it, and you feel that too tonight. A gentle unease, not fear, not danger. Just a reminder that you are not in your element. Still, the body wants rest, even here. So you do as they did. You light a single coil of aziki, clove incense. You rinse your feet with cold water. You lie flat arms out as if offering yourself to sleep like an altar sacrifice. Outside, the cicadas drone. The netting sways. Your pillow grows warm. But somehow slowly, the discomfort fades. The newness softens. Because maybe, just maybe, sleep isn't a matter of location. Maybe it's ritual intention patience. The same in England as it is in India, in Ghana, in Singapore, in Trinidad. And tonight, beneath the netting, despite the heat, despite the strange air and stranger birds you drift, not easily, but eventually, the air is still thick when you wake if in fact you ever truly slept. You rise slowly, limbs stiff and spirit softer, and wander once more into the hush of night. But this time no incense, no herbal pillows, just silence, the kind that buzzes faintly with awareness. Because tonight you aren't trying to escape insomnia. You're trying to hazone it. You've reached a curious chapter in the Victorian story, the point at which sleeplessness wasn't just tolerated or treated, it was celebrated. Welcome to the brief, peculiar period when insomnia became fashionable. Yes, really. It began subtly in literary salons and private journals, where poets and philosophers dropped lines about their productive nights or waking reveries. But soon the idea spread. Not sleeping might mean you were simply too brilliant, too sensitive, or too deeply attuned to the troubled beauty of existence to drift off like everyone else. You lie back now and imagine yourself among them, a sleepless artist in candlelight pen, poised over a fresh page, eyes rimmed in poetic weariness. Your insomnia in this version of the story is a badge of intellect. You are not weak, you are contemplative, and society begins to agree with you. By the 1880s, nervous exhaustion and restless nights became common among the upper class, especially among those who considered themselves modern. Sleep was associated with dullness, even provinciality. To be wide awake at 2 a.m., scribbling verses or embroidering handkerchiefs with cryptic monograms was considered interesting. A generation of insomniacs emerged not sickly, but stylish. Doctors were baffled. Old remedies didn't work because these patients didn't want to be cured. They arrived at clinics in satin-lined carriages, described their racing minds in exquisite metaphor, and nodded gravely when told to avoid overthinking. Then they returned home and wrote sonnets about it. A medical journal from 1889 describes one patient as too refined for repose. His pulse was steady, his appetite normal, but he insisted with great dignity that sleep had become vulgar. Others echoed him. One heiress in Bath claimed she'd stopped sleeping altogether after reading Cyrus, Plato, in the original Greek. A playwright in Edinburgh told his doctor, "Sleep is for shopkeepers." A baronet's daughter published a series of nighttime essays under the pen name Lady After Midnight. You smile amused. It's absurd, of course, and yet relatable, because sometimes insomnia does feel like evidence of a churning brain, doesn't it? A signal that you're still engaged, still alive, still wrestling with something important. The Victorians certainly thought so. Fashion journals even offered nightwear collections for the thinking woman. Black satin robes, loose collars, writing gloves. Photographs featured models holding books they hadn't read, staring wistfully out windows they'd never opened. And then there were the ad salons. These weren't hair salons, of course. They were literary gatherings often beginning at 9 p.m. and continuing well into the night, deliberately timed to mirror the patterns of their sleep-deprived hosts. Guests arrived with journals, sketchbooks, and insomnia anecdotes. They drank cooled milk with mint-shared spoonfuls of marmalade and discussed dreams they hadn't had. If someone nodded off mid-recital, they were covered with a shawl and quietly admired. One salon regular wrote, "To dream while awake, and wake while others dream, that is the new elegance." Did they actually enjoy being tired? Probably not. But they enjoyed being seen as people who didn't need sleep. In a world obsessed with control and repression, refusing rest became its own form of rebellion. And yet, the body eventually pushes back. Even the most elegant insomniacs began to falter. One confessed in her memoir that she once fell asleep mid-sentence during a toast at a wedding. Another, a composer, began to hallucinate that his piano was whispering criticisms about his tempo. At some point, sleeplessness stops being romantic. It starts to feel hollow, so the trend faded, slowly, quietly. New fashions came, new therapies, a new respect for quiet resilience over noisy fatigue. But for a brief window to be sleepless was to be interesting. To toss and turn was to be part of an elite club of artistic insubordinates. You are not in that club now. Not really. But tonight, as you lie in bed and let your mind flit through poetry memory and the strange half-dream of historical reflection, you feel something familiar. Not fatigue exactly, but a tender defiance. The sense that even if sleep never comes, the night will not go to waste. You turn over. The sheets sigh, and even though your eyes remain open, they see differently now. You are not broken. You are simply still awake. And in this long tradition of thinkers, worriers, artists, and inventors that makes you human. So you're still awake, still reclining, still wrapped in whatever mixture of modesty and mischief you chose for your imaginary sleepwear. And that's okay, because now the room changes again. It dims not into darkness, but into something softer, warmer, lit not by candlelight or gas lamp, but by candle flame. There are curtains of heavy damask, and somewhere the faint rattle of crystal pendants from a chandelier. And in the center of this parlor-turned sanctuary, a table round and polished, hands joined, eyes closed, a whisper. Are you with us? Yes, dear listener, you've stumbled into one of the more theatrical corners of Victorian sleep lore, the seance, more specifically, spiritualist sleep cures. Because to the Victorians, insomnia didn't just mean anxiety, indigestion, or poetic temperament. Sometimes they believed it was caused by ghosts, or spirits, or magnetic interference from the dead, or perhaps unresolved cosmic business. Call it what you like. But in drawing rooms across England between 1850 and 1890, many believed that sleeplessness had supernatural origins. Some thought it was possession, that a spirit had latched onto your aura and refused to let you drift into unconsciousness. Others blamed a thought residue. The lingering emotional vapors left behind by dead relatives. One woman, convinced she'd inherited her aunt's nightmares, slept with a silver teaspoon tied to her wrist to reflect the unwanted visions back into the ether. Was it science? No. Was it soothing? In a strange way? Yes. Let's begin with the most common spiritualist remedy, the seance for sleep. These weren't dramatic affairs with levitating chairs and ectoplasm. They were intimate, quiet. A gathering of 2 or 3 close companions, often women who would hold hands at dusk and invite the spirit world not to deliver messages, but to leave them alone. One medium described it as petitioning the silence. Another, opening the window and politely requesting the wind to go elsewhere. The goal wasn't enlightenment. It was relief. A spiritual reset for those whose minds and bodies had forgotten how to let go. These seances often included soothing chants, mixed language invocations, Latin, Greek, or entirely invented, and the burning of herbs, usually bay leaves, sage, or a twist of rosemary soaked in gin. The theory was that the act of asking, gently, respectfully for peace, helped ease the body into that same state. And for some it worked. You imagine it now: a low table, a few flickering tapers, a dish of salt, perhaps a hairbrush made of bone. Someone murmurs your name just once, and then nothing. Just presence, just breath. Sleep doesn't arrive suddenly. It hovers, watches, waits for permission. Then there were the dream circles, These were slightly more structured spiritualist meetings where attendees gathered to share their insomnia and their dreams. Each participant would describe the images that visited them at night, whether real or imagined. The theory that dreams were shared territory, and that the collective mind might heal the individual's restless one. A retired milliner once claimed she stopped having night terrors after joining a dream circle and learning that someone else dreamed of the same. Green dog with glass eyes. They named him Herbert. He never returned, and of course there were these magnetic sleep passes. This was a fringe spiritualist technique often performed by men in waistcoats with faintly alarming eyes. The practitioner would stand beside the insomniac and make slow, sweeping motions over their body without touching. The idea was to realign the spiritual field, to comb the soul, as one leaflet put it. You'd sit in a chair, eyes shut, as invisible currents were pushed and pulled around you. Sometimes the practitioner whispered things like, release, or down, down, down. Other times they simply exhaled theatrically until you felt compelled to yawn in sympathy. Historians still argue whether these practices were mystical medical or just highly theatrical placebo effects. And really, does it matter? Because in the end, the spiritualist view of sleep wasn't entirely wrong. It treated insomnia not as a symptom to be cured, but as a conversation. Between the body, the world, and whatever mysteries lie between the two. And tonight you feel that too. Not ghosts exactly, not echoes, just memory of a time when sleep was allowed to be strange, sacred, slippery, when you could ask the night for help and someone alive or otherwise might answer. So you lie there beneath your imagined velvet coverlet and you ask quietly, if anyone's listening, I'm tired. And maybe something stirs, or maybe not, but the asking, that part you've done, and now sleep might just be on its way. There's a creak from the hallway. Not ominous, just the familiar protest of old wood cooling in the night air. Somewhere a mouse sneezes. Or maybe that was your stomach. And now, having tried seances singing wires, vibrating beds, and poetic self-denial, you begin to think, perhaps the solution is simpler. Maybe sleep isn't about banishing the thoughts in your head. Maybe it's about feeding the body. Literally. Yes, tonight we enter a forbidden yet delicious corner of Victorian bedtime life. The midnight snack. Let's begin with a whisper. It was not encouraged. Eating at night, according to most Victorian health manuals, was deeply improper. It confused the digestion. It muddled the humors. It invited nightmares. One etiquette book warned that any food consumed after the 9th chime of evening shall reside in the gut like uninvited houseguests, grumbling and pacing until dawn. And yet everyone did it, in secret, with ceremony, with immense satisfaction. You're probably doing it now. Victorian midnight snacks weren't what you'd expect. No cereal, no peanut butter on toast. Instead, you had toast water. Yes, you read that right. A stale piece of bread lightly scorched, placed in warm water and steeped until the water turned cloudy. Strained and sipped. Allegedly calming. Arrowroot biscuits. Considered both digestive and morally neutral, they made no bold flavors, no sudden movements. They were the edible equivalent of a long sigh. Treacle spoon. Some kept a little pot of black treacle or golden syrup in their drawer. A single spoonful swallowed slowly was said to weigh the tongue and silence the belly. Then there were the more imaginative indulgences. Some favored a slice of rock-cold mutton, or a bit of pickled walnut, which somehow made it into several respectable nighttime menus. One clergyman claimed he could not sleep without first eating exactly 5 salted almonds, while pacing his bedroom barefoot. Others turned to sweets, fig jelly, rose lozenges, molasses pills, technically a laxative, but let's not split hairs. Children were sometimes given warm milk with honey and cloves, though parents warned it might awaken the inner appetite and cause unreasonable breakfast expectations. There was even a brief craze in the 1870s for nighttime custards, spooned from silver dishes by candlelight, often flavored with nutmeg saffron or bitter almond. The custard must not be hot, warned the Ladies' Evening Guide. It must be comfortably indifferent. Historians still debate whether the popularity of these dishes reflected genuine belief in their effectiveness, or just the universal truth that people get hungry before bed. But here's where it gets interesting. Eating at night was also emotional. People didn't just nibble to sleep. They fed their feelings, long before the phrase existed. Grief, worry, restlessness, boredom each had its corresponding snack. A young widow wrote in her diary, "I keep a piece of sugared quince beside the bed, for sweetness when the dark is too bitter." A sailor's wife recorded sardines at 2 a.m, too sharp but better than silence. And one widowed schoolmaster in Liverpool is said to have invented the Wan midnight sandwich, a single slice of bread folded with nothing inside, just the ritual of the bite. Even the Queen indulged. Her attendants reported that after particularly long banquets, she would sometimes sneak a sliver of sponge cake or a sugared prune before retiring. Not because she was hungry, one lady wrote, but because she was still thinking. And isn't that what keeps most of us up? Still thinking, still chewing the day. Which is why, despite every handbook's warnings, the midnight snack endured. Some households even prepared trays in advance. Tiny porcelain cups, doilies, a teaspoon of marmalade, a miniature teapot covered in a knitted cozy. It wasn't just indulgence. It was preparation for surrender. A way of telling the body, "It's okay now. You've done enough. Here's something sweet before the dark." And maybe that's what you need tonight, too. Not a cure, not a method, just a bite. So picture it. A little plate, a bit of bread, a shard of candied ginger, a sliver of soft cheese. Or nothing at all, just the idea of it. The gesture, the allowance. You are permitted to feed your hunger. You are permitted to not be done with the day. And you are permitted to rest anyway. Because sleep-like sweetness sometimes comes a furry only after you stop resisting it. And with a full belly, or just the thought of one, you close your eyes again. And maybe for once you don't dream of being chased or judged or late. You dream of custard. And you sleep. Your breathing is slower now. The custard dream still lingers a soft golden blur behind your eyelids. You are almost asleep. But just before you sink something inside, you ask the old question, what if this never ends? And just like that, we arrive at the most desperate corner of our journey, the last resort, the locked gate at the edge of the Victorian night. Tonight, we step carefully, respectfully into the shadowed hallways of Yorisai, the asylum. Because for some Victorians, when every drop of laudanum failed, when the tonic ran dry, when the prayers and pressure points and spoonfuls of treacle could not grant sleep, there was only one place left to go. A place for those who were too tired to keep pretending. They weren't tired. Let's begin with the diagnosis. Victorian doctors were notoriously fond of elaborate labels, and chronic sleeplessness was often called protracted wakefulness, exhaustive melancholia, or in more poetic cases, perilous agitation of the mind at dusk. It was considered both a symptom and a sickness, a sign that the mind had worn thin, that the nerves had frayed into static, that something had misaligned, and now, instead of rest, the body demanded constant awareness. For men, this was sometimes tied to overwork clerks and merchants who labored beyond reason. For women, it was more often linked to emotion, hysterical mourning, romantic rumination, or contemplative anxiety. But no matter the cause, the result was the same. The beds stopped helping. The belts, the pillows, the powders, nothing worked. So they were sent away. To rest, some to private homes with wide lawns and sunrooms, others to city asylums with barred windows and daily schedules like clock faces that never broke. You find yourself there now, not as a patient perhaps, but as a quiet visitor. A compassionate ghost moving down whitewashed corridors. You pass rooms where patients sit beside potted ferns knitting without patterns. Others stare from windows waiting for a bird that no longer visits. The sleep ward is quiet, very quiet, because here silence was the treatment and the problem. Beds were separated by curtains. The sheets were stiff. The windows were nailed shut to prevent distraction by weather. The lights, gas or candle, were snuffed at precisely 9:03 every night, and still many patients did not sleep. One nurse kept a journal writing only of the noises she heard in the ward between dusk and dawn, the scratching of fingernails against linen, the whimper of breath that wasn't quite crying, the whispered word again, repeated 23 times. Doctors prescribed cold compresses, warm compresses, hydrotherapy shock chairs, and in some institutions, isolation chambers. Small, dark rooms where the mind could reset. No stimulation, no language, just the bare bones of solitude. Did it help? Rarely. One patient wrote on the wall with a borrowed pencil, "I have slept 3 times this month. Each one was a funeral." And yet some found a kind of peace here. The predictability, the removal from the chaos of ordinary life, the forced slowness. Even if they never slept fully, they rested in some strange clinical way. Historians still argue over the morality of these treatments, over whether they helped or harmed, over what sleep really meant to those inside such places. But there's one story worth sharing. A woman named Mrs. L, no first name recorded, was admitted in 1887 for persistent nocturnal dread. She had not slept more than an hour a night in 5 years. She had tried everything. In the asylum, she was given no medicine, no tea, no instructions. Just a nurse named Violet who sat beside her each night and read aloud, slowly, monotonously, the same passage every time, a description of clouds from a shipping manual. On the 42nd night, Mrs. L fell asleep mid-sentence. She awoke 6 hours later and cried, not because she was cured, but because she remembered what it was to forget. Forget time, forget self, forget everything for a moment. That's what sleep is in the end, a forgetting. And for those who fear it or who chase it so long, they forget why it becomes a myth. A bedtime story for grown people, but even in the coldest rooms beneath the harshest lights, the myth sometimes returns. Soft-footed, slow, patient. It does not ask for permission. It simply waits. And maybe as you lie here tired but safe, you feel it waiting for you too. The air is still. The kind of stillness that doesn't ask questions. It simply exists soft and low like the space between heartbeats. And this time as you breathe in, you feel at the edge of sleep. Nearer than it has ever been. But before you drift away completely, there's one last stop. One final room at the end of this long, candlelit corridor. Tonight you enter a place few ever spoke of even then. A place not of desperation or fashion or fear, but of that hope. You've arrived at one of the world's first Victorian sleep clinics. Yes, they existed. Not as we know them today with electrodes and data charts, but as small, carefully monitored rooms where the act of sleeping was studied, coached, and if possible, restored. Let's step inside. The clinic is quiet, tidy, modest. It sits behind a discreet brick facade in London, tucked between a bakery and a print shop. There's no signage, just a brass plate marked Somnus House, by referral only. Inside, the floors are scrubbed pine. The air smells faintly of lavender and new paper. There is no waiting room, no bustle, only a long hallway, with 10 doors, each leading to a sleep chamber. Each room is different. Some have beds, others couches. One features a gently sloping, padded incline. No pillow, no blanket, just elevation and air. Here, patients are observed not with judgment, but with curiosity. Their sleep rituals are recorded in leather-bound journals. Their murmurs noted. Their rhythms charted. Each guest is assigned a Wabikis sleep guide. Not a doctor, not quite a nurse. More like a companion. Someone who sits in the corner listens, and when asked reads aloud from the Gazetteer of Common Moths, or the collected meditations of St. Teresa. In this clinic, there are no clocks on the walls. Instead, small sand glasses sit beside the bed. If the patient turns one before dozing off, the guide makes a note. Willing to try. Let's meet one of the guests. Her name is Miss Avery. She's 42. She hasn't slept a full night in over a decade. She's not a poet or a philosopher or a patient at an asylum. She's a governess. Her sleep unraveled after her father's death slowly, like a ribbon tugged free by a child. At Somnus House, she is not asked to explain herself. She is simply given a room with green curtains and a chair by the fire. On her 3rd night, she falls asleep during a reading about clouds over the Aegean. Not deeply, not long, but enough. She wakes with her hand still curled around a linen bookmark. And when asked how she feels, she whispers, like a hinge has loosened. And maybe that's all sleep ever is, the loosening of a hinge. The slow, delicate swing from thought into dream. You lie down now, imagining your own room in Somnus House. There's a basin of warm water at your feet. A candle flickering near the window. A woolen throw draped over your legs like a promise. Outside, the city breathes quietly. The fire snaps. And from the hallway, a voice calls gently, "Are you ready?" And you are. You don't need answers. You don't need another cure. You just need permission. And in this place, this soft, strange, forgotten pocket of time, you are finally given it. You don't sleep because you're fixed. You sleep because you're allowed. Because after every potion, every pillow, every prayer, there is a moment when the mind stops reaching, and the body follows. And now at last, so do you. Let it go now. Let the teacups and lace collars, the shadow lanterns and velvet fainting couches, the seaweed-stuffed pillows and murmured seances, let all of it drift behind you, like the trace of a dream half-remembered. You've walked the entire night through with those who couldn't sleep. You've listened to their strange remedies, watched their clockless rituals, and felt their weariness folded gently into your own. And now there's nothing left to fix. No tincture to sip, no nightcap to knot, no final page to read, just the steady rhythm of breath. The room around you fades not in darkness, but in hush. The kind of hush that settles when the story ends, but the silence that follows is its own comfort. You are not alone here. You never were. You are part of a long, winding history of minds that couldn't quiet until they could, and hearts that fluttered then softened, and eyes that closed because, eventually, the body found its way. So wherever you are, whatever time, whatever place, know that you're in good company. And the night is still holding you, still waiting patient and soft like the end of a sentence you no longer need to hear. Now breathe, and drift, and let this story end without you.